Hi, I'm Jennifer from the Worcester branch of the Wayne County Library, and today I'd like to add a little bit of springtime to your life with showing you how to make an Easter egg ornament. Now, this is going to require a little foam egg. This is approximately 3 inches long by 2 1/4 inches wide, and you will need 48 squares of fabric that are 2 1/4 inches square. You're going to need a lot of straight pins. And then to top it all off, you will need ribbon. And so I've got a 1/4 inch wide ribbon to use. Now, when I first came across this pattern, it was described as a pine cone ornament and using Christmas fabrics to add to your Christmas tree. But I know some people like to decorate for Easter, so I thought, let's turn this into an Easter egg ornament using some pastel fabrics. So I'm just going to start one for you today because, as you can see, once you get it going, it's pretty repetitive. It's going to be row after row after row of doing the same thing. So I will at least get you started. But once you have cut your 48 squares of fabric, you want to set aside about 3 or 4, just leave them plain. But the rest of them, what you want to do, and I've already folded these, you will fold them from corner to corner and press them. So you've got a triangle. And then on this fold side, you're going to fold point over to point and press that fold too. So what you end up with is a triangle that's 4 layers thick. You've got a fold here and a fold here. And I've already got mine prepped and ready to go. So let's start. What you want first is one of the plain squares that you haven't pressed, and hold your egg so that the wider part is down because you're going to cover the narrow end first. So you want to just drape this over, kind of center it on that narrow end, and we're going to pin down all 4 corners. This is going to, as you'll see here, cover the bottom of the egg so that you don't have to worry about getting all those points to cover every square inch of the styrofoam underneath. So we're just going to take those pins and get the corners down. Now you can see it's not perfectly flat, and that's okay, because what we will then do is start adding our folded pieces. So it usually helps if you can juggle a couple of these at the bottom and to try and get them lined up as close as you can to the center. Now, if you don't get it all the way to the center, that's okay. You're doing the best you can here. But we're going to try and get those relatively close there in the center and then pin down, and I should say the narrow points of these are going to be pointing downwards. See, this is how it will look eventually. If I can get these pinned, I'll be able to show you a little bit better. You're pinning down the wide side of the triangle, not the point. Okay, so if you see here, you've got this fold and this fold coming up to this point, and that point is the one that you want to leave free. These other 2 points are what get pinned down on top of the square that you've started with. And you want them to be pretty much on opposite sides. So then the next 2, we're going to come around perpendicular to those. And you want to keep them all kind of at the same If you imagine lines around the egg so that the bottoms all are kind of around that same line. At this point, I'm taking the pins out of the square because we're going to be able to hold that down pretty well. And again, you're getting the points. You do want to get that pin in as close to the point as you can. All right, so we've got all 4 of those pinned in. This is what it looks like from the bottom. And that's our first row. Now, you could just do all of your squares one color, one pattern, whatever, and make them all the way up. If you've got a nice colorful fabric that you're using, maybe you just want to use that for the whole egg. Otherwise, if you want to do contrasting colors, then I would suggest you do one fabric for one row and then the other fabric for the next row. Now, on the next row, what we're going to do is kind of offset this. You'll see these we pinned in at right angles. So these were directly opposite each other, these were directly opposite each other, and at a right angle from these. For our next row, we're going to do this also from one side to the other and from one side to the other, but they're going to be at diagonals from the first row. I'll show you. So here's our first one. And then we'll go to the opposite side. And I'm keeping this roughly on the same row as the first ones. We're just doing an extra set of 4 going around. Oh, that one's a little bit low. Okay, so there's my 2 on opposite sides. Now, if you're wondering what fabrics you should use for this, quilting cottons are usually the best. You've got a consistency of thickness. They're pretty easy to work with. They fold very nicely. So if you're just doing finger pressing instead of using an iron, those should work pretty well. What I'm using, and I'm not entirely happy with it, the striped fabric is actually a cotton flannel, so it's a little bit thicker. And then this yellow is kind of a gauzy polyester cotton blend. It's not one I like very much, but it's what I had on hand to match the flannel. So I'm going to make it work somehow. All right. So there's our row. Again, it's not perfectly spaced, but you get the idea that that first row, everything's at right angles, and then you turn it, and these are all at right angles. And then we just start adding more rows. So your next row, you want to come down a little bit. Let's see, that might be somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 inch, maybe. And you're just going to repeat the same thing. So you follow what you had before. So this first fabric, I'm placing this next row directly under, so about a 1/2 inch under the points lining up this previous one. And then I'll go around to the other side, match that one up as well, and pin that in place. All right, so we've got those 2. And remember, those second ones then are at right angles, so all right, so there's the second row of the flannel, and you see how that's building up. And now we'll do the second row of the yellow. And because the egg does widen as you go along, this is why you're putting both fabrics on the same row. And I will show you. So before I put this yellow on, you could see the pin from the previous row of yellow. By putting the second fabric on the same row as the first, you're helping to cover up those pins as you go along. It'll take some getting used to, especially in the first couple of rows where everything's fairly close together. But that is a good measure to go by. So we'll get this second fabric on. So there's the first two, and then the second two will be at right angles. See, this is why it's really helpful to get all of your squares pressed ahead of time so that you can just grab the next one and keep going. It helps you to get into a better rhythm. All right, so that's what it's looking like now that we've got 2 rows of each color in. I'm not going to keep going row by row because that's going to get kind of boring for you to watch, but I will show you then what we're doing once you get to the top. As you can see, the rows keep going up and up and up, but by the time you get to the top, this is what's going to happen. You're still going to have a patch of styrofoam showing, not to mention all of your pins. So you'll want to take one of your still unpressed, unfolded pieces, the squares. If you want to take pinking shears, so you've got a nice, neat, jagged edge around it, that's great. But what you'll want to do is take one of those and just cover the end up here and just pin it in the middle. You don't need to worry about pinning down the points because you're still going to have all of these points, but pin it in the middle, and then you can cut your length of ribbon. And what I would do is you've got your length of ribbon, bring your ends around and tie your knot there with your loops. So you've got some tail left, but you've got your loops and a nice sturdy knot, and then you're going to need to pin that first in the knot, but then you might also need to secure the loops as well so that when you hold this loop, you don't just pull it right out, which could happen. So that's how you're going to finish it, and I'm not going to do that on here because I haven't finished the egg, but you don't want to see me doing that for the next half hour, however long it's going to take. That's how you do it though. And this is going to be a relatively easy craft to do if you've got the materials handy. If you're a quilter, you will certainly have the materials handy aside from the foam eggs. But this is also something that we are going to do in an in-person program in March. So if this interests you, give us a call to sign up for that or to at least get on the waiting list depending on when you call. And we will be able to make some in person to get ready for Easter and springtime and beautiful growing things. So that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you'll give this a try at some point. And in the meantime, stay healthy, be kind, and get creative. Bye.